The light within the nexus was not born of stars, but of consensus. It flowed from the crystalline walls and pooled in the vast, silent chamber, a visible manifestation of the luminary conclave's unified consciousness. Yet today, the light was troubled, its usual serene silver-blue hue marred by flickering undertones of crimson and violet, the colors of fear and uncertainty. At the center of the immense void, on platforms of solidified thought, floated the representatives of the galaxy's most ancient and powerful species. High Strategist Vorlag of the Cathar stood rigid, his faceted, obsidian form absorbing the light and giving nothing back. His people were the sword and shield of the known galaxy, forged in the crucible of 1,000 conflicts, and in his posture was the unyielding certainty of a weapon that knows its purpose. Opposite him, Elder Xylos of the Glyptons drifted in a slow, meditative spiral, his body a living continent of stone and ancient coral, etched with the memory of eons. The Glyptons were the archivists, the historians, the conscience of the conclave, and Xylos carried the weight of that duty in every patient, deliberate movement. Between them and encompassing them was the Luminar, the host species of the Nexus, a being of pure, coherent energy that manifested as a shimmering, silent aurora, its voice a chorus of harmonious resonance that spoke directly to the mind. The subject of their disquiet hung in the central hollow display, a dark, inert object, vast and menacing in its utter simplicity. It had been discovered adrift in the graveyard of empires, that desolate quadrant of space where the ghosts of fallen civilizations littered the void like cosmic dust. But this was no ruin. Scans showed its hull to be impossibly dense, its geometry an offense to the elegant, curved aesthetics of the conclave races. It was a brutalist monolith, a scar of straight lines and sharp angles, utterly devoid of ornamentation or any recognizable technology. And yet it was not dead. Deep within its core, a flicker of energy, a slow, rhythmic pulse had been detected, a heartbeat. The conclave's greatest minds had cross-referenced every known ship design, every architectural philosophy from 1,000,000 worlds over 100 millennia. They found nothing except for a single, terrifying match in a sealed, forbidden archive of the Glyptons. A record so old, so steeped in myth and horror, that it was considered little more than a cautionary fable. The archive called the object's creators humans, and the object itself a warship. It must be sterilized. Vorlag's voice was the sound of grinding tectonic plates, a low, powerful bass that vibrated through the very platform he stood upon. The records, however fragmented, are unequivocal. The species known as human was a plague. They waged a war not of conquest, but of annihilation. They brought an era known only as the Great Silence, extinguishing suns and rendering entire sectors of the galaxy uninhabitable. This, relic, is a weapon from that age. We cannot allow the heart that beats within it to awaken fully. He gestured with a crystalline limb toward the hollow display. My fleets are in position. A coordinated salvo of singularity warheads will unmake it at the atomic level. We will erase this blight before it has a chance to fester anew. To hesitate is to invite a cataclysm the likes of which this galaxy has not seen since the age of their madness. Elder Xylos shifted, his ancient form shedding motes of phosphorescent dust that swirled in the currents of the chamber. His voice was slow, layered with the echoes of ages, a sound like stones tumbling in a deep cosmic river. Caution, High Strategist, you speak of records that are themselves shadows. The Glypton archives are vast, yet our knowledge of this era is a tapestry of scorched threads and gaping holes. We have tales of their ferocity, yes. We have data fragments showing worlds reduced to glass, but we also have whispers of a deep, profound sorrow. We have artistic renderings, salvaged from the wreckage of their long-dead contemporaries that depict the humans not as monsters, but as figures of immense, tragic power. We see them creating, building, mourning. The narrative is not as simple as you suggest. Simplicity is a virtue in strategy, Elder, Vorlag countered, his facets gleaming with cold logic. When faced with a predator of unmatched lethality, one does not pause to contemplate its sorrow. One eliminates the threat. This vessel is an artifact of a species that wielded extinction as a tool. Its very existence is an act of aggression. What purpose could a warship of such scale serve but to unmake civilizations? The Luminar's light shifted, a wave of calming gold washing through the chamber. Its collective voice entered their minds, not as sound, but as pure concept, a seamless translation of thought. The object has not acted, it has not transmitted, it has not moved, it only is. To strike a silent thing is to act on fear, not on evidence. The conclave was formed to elevate us beyond such primal impulses. Vorlag turned his impassive gaze toward the aurora. And it was also formed to ensure our collective survival. The evidence is in the graveyard of empires that surrounds this very object. It lies in the silent worlds and the dead stars catalogued in the Glypton's own forbidden texts. The humans brought silence. This is their instrument. To wait for it to sing its song again is to be the fool who stands before the tsunami, admiring the beauty of the wave. Xylos drifted closer to the central display, his stony gaze fixed on the monolithic ship. But what if the song is not what we expect? The fragments speak of a war, high strategist, but they are strangely silent on the nature of their foe. They speak of other races fighting alongside the humans, races now long gone. Why would anyone ally themselves with a plague? The Cathar philosophy is one of preemptive defense, I understand this. But the Glypton way is one of understanding. To destroy this vessel is to destroy the only primary source of that lost era. We would be burning the last page of a book we have never read, simply because we fear the story it tells. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the chamber. The energy signature within it is not one of aggression. It is stable. It is a containment field, not a power core for a weapon. My archivists believe it is a stasis field of unimaginable complexity. Something is being preserved in there. Or perhaps something is being imprisoned. The suggestion hung in the air, a chilling alternative to Vorlag's certainty. A prison, a tomb, a warship designed not to project power outward, but to hold something terrible within. The crimson of fear in the nexus light deepened, now laced with the dark purple of profound mystery. The high strategist remained unmoved, his logic a fortress. Preservation, imprisonment, these are semantic games, Elder. A cage built to hold a monster is still a part of the monster's legend. If it fails, the monster is free. If the stasis field collapses, what might emerge, the last of the silence bringers, or the very thing they fought and were consumed by? The outcome is the same, a threat unleashed upon a galaxy that has finally found a fragile peace. The risk is too great, the Cathar will not abide it. The debate continued for what felt like an eternity, a clash of philosophies that had defined the two great powers of the conclave for millennia. The pragmatism of the sword versus the patience of the scholar. Vorlag detailed the precise mechanics of his proposed attack, the overlapping fields of fire, the fail-safe measures to ensure not a single quark of the object survived. Xylos countered with pleas for observation, for the deployment of deep-range psionic probes, for an attempt at communication, however faint the hope of a response. And as they spoke, a silent alert chimed in the minds of every being in the Nexus. It came from the flotilla of Cathar and Glypton vessels that maintained a nervous vigil at the edge of the graveyard of empires. On the central hollow display, the dark, monolithic shape of the human warship began to change. Not its shape, but its texture. Microscopic conduits, previously dormant and invisible, began to trace their way across the hull, glowing with a soft, white light. The rhythmic pulse within its core quickened, the beat growing stronger, faster, a heart stirring from a slumber of ages. The lines of light converged on a single point at the vessel's prow, forming a complex geometric pattern that was neither a weapon's aperture nor a sensor array. It was something else, something symbolic. "It is awakening," Vorlag stated, the words a flat, heavy certainty. He did not sound triumphant, only grimly resolved. "The time for debate is over. I am ordering my fleets to open fire." "Wait," the Luminar's command was not a request. A wave of pure force, gentle but absolute, rippled through the Nexus, freezing the high strategist in place. His limbs were locked, his communication channels to his fleet severed. It was a rare, shocking display of the Luminar's authority. "Observe." The geometric pattern on the hull of the ancient ship pulsed once, a brilliant, silent flash of white light. Then, from that point, a beam of modulated energy shot out into the void. It was not a weapon. It carried no destructive power. It was a communication laser, but one of such purity and coherence that it made the Conclave's most advanced transmitters seem like primitive signal fires. It painted a complex message onto a nearby dust cloud, a canvas of interstellar gas and debris. It was not a language of words or symbols known to any species present. It was a language of pure mathematics. It began with the prime numbers. Then it moved to the fundamental constants of the universe. The speed of light, the Planck constant, the gravitational constant. It was a greeting, a statement of intelligence, a calm, ordered, and profoundly rational introduction. The chamber was gripped by a silence deeper and more complete than any void. Vorlag's crystalline form seemed to shrink, the absolute certainty draining from him, replaced by a stunned confusion. Xylos drifted forward, his ancient eyes wide, drinking in the data that flowed from the Glypton observation ships. The message was beautiful. It was elegant. It was the furthest thing from the mindless roar of a berserker species. It was the calm, measured greeting of a scientist, a philosopher. Then the message changed. The mathematics resolved into a simple, universal star chart pinpointing their own location and the location of the warship. It followed this with a simple, endlessly repeating query encoded in the universal language of physics. The query was not a demand. It was not a threat. It was a question transmitted with infinite patience. A question that sent a tremor of disbelief through the very foundations of the conclave's understanding of the past. "It is asking," Xylos whispered, his voice trembling with the weight of revelation, "if the war is over." The question echoed in the silent nexus, a ghost from a forgotten age. A warship built by a species of supposed galactic destroyers had awakened after countless millennia, and its first words were not a threat but a plea for information. A question steeped in a weariness that transcended time. The galaxy had trembled at its awakening, but not for the reasons they had feared. They had dreaded the roar of a monster. Instead, they heard the quiet, hopeful whisper of a soldier, asking if they could finally come home. The crimson light of fear in the chamber faded, replaced by a profound, unsettling, and utterly transformative blue of wonder. The ancient human warship had woken up, and the conclave, for the first time, did not know what to think. A consensus was reached, not through debate, but through the shared, stunning gravity of the moment. Vorlag, released from the Luminar's hold, did not reissue his order. He stood silent, his formidable mind racing to reconcile the data before him with the dogma he had held for centuries. Xylos, representing the path of understanding, was granted permission to formulate a reply. The Glypton communications specialists, the finest in the galaxy, worked with a feverish intensity, crafting a response in the same elegant language of mathematics and physics. They confirmed the cessation of all known large-scale galactic hostilities, referencing star patterns to indicate the passage of immense spans of time. They conveyed that the current era was one of relative peace, governed by the conclave they now represented. They extended a cautious, formal greeting. The response was sent, a single, coherent pulse of light back toward the monolithic vessel. The wait for a reply was an agony of suspense. Every being in the nexus, from the stoic Cathar to the ancient Glypton, held their metaphorical breath. They had answered the ghost's question. They had told the soldier the war was over. What would it do now? Would it power down, its mission complete? Would it reveal its occupants? Or was this all some impossibly elaborate deception, a prelude to an attack so cunning it began with a disarming whisper? The human warship, which the Glypton archivists had tentatively named *Vigilance based on a corrupted text fragment, remained silent for a period that felt like a lifetime. Its hull lights remained a soft, steady white. The energy pulse in its core slowed, returning to a calm, rhythmic beat. Then a new transmission came. It was no longer a laser painting images on dust clouds, but a direct, tight-beam communication encoded with a staggering density of information. It was an invitation. It contained coordinates not for a rendezvous but for a point in space a safe distance from both the ship and the conclave fleet. And it contained a protocol, a key to decipher a new layer of communication. It was offering to speak. In the Nexus, a new debate erupted, this one charged not with fear but with a dizzying mix of hope and trepidation. To accept was to risk everything. To refuse was to close the door on the single greatest historical discovery in millennia. Vorlag argued for extreme caution, proposing a drone be sent, an unmanned proxy. Xylos, however, argued for a gesture of trust. "They have shown us their nature through their first words," the elder stated, his voice resonating with conviction. "They were precise, rational, and peaceful. They now offer dialogue. To send a machine in our place would be an insult. It would be an act of cowardice. We must meet them, elder to elder, mind to mind." The Luminar's light glowed with a decisive gold. "We agree. A single vessel, the best diplomatic envoy from the Glyptons with a Cathar honor guard. We will observe from the Nexus, ready to intervene. Trust must be offered, or trust to be received." And so it was done. A sleek, organic Glypton vessel, a thing of polished obsidian and living crystal that resembled a great spacefaring nautilus, detached from the observation fleet. It moved with silent grace toward the designated coordinates. Aboard was Xylos himself, accompanied by a small retinue of his most trusted linguists and historians, and a single, silent Cathar warrior, a sentinel chosen by Vorlag for her discipline and restraint. The weight of galactic history, past and future, rested on their mission. As the Glypton ship arrived at the meeting point, the space before it shimmered, not with the crude flash of a hyperspace exit, but with a gentle folding of reality itself. A small, human vessel appeared as if stepping through a curtain. It was as stark and brutally functional as its parent ship, a simple, dark gray polyhedron. It was unmanned. The conclave watched, their collective tension rising. Had Vorlag been right? Was this a trap? A channel opened, using the protocols the Vigilance had provided. A voice spoke. It was not a synthetic translation, but a direct, telepathic concept broadcast with flawless clarity and precision, a testament to a technology the Conclave had only theorized about. The voice was calm, measured, and ancient. It had the timbre of a soul that had seen too much, a quiet authority born not of arrogance, but of immense responsibility. "We greet you in peace," the voice resonated in Xylos's mind and through him to the entire conclave watching from the Nexus. "I am the custodian of the vessel you have designated *vigilance*. Forgive our caution in not revealing ourselves physically. The protocols of our long-dormant mission require a period of verification. We are an echo, a memory of humanity entrusted with a final duty." Xylos, his ancient heart beating faster than it had in 1,000 years, projected his own thoughts in response, his voice a calm river of inquiry. "I am Elder Xylos of the Glyptons, speaking for the Luminary Conclave. We are the inheritors of this galactic sector. We welcome you, custodian. Your awakening has unsettled many ancient assumptions. You asked if the war was over. By all our records, there has been no galactic-scale conflict for eons." There was a pause, a silence that felt heavy with consideration. The custodian's mental voice returned, tinged with something Xylos could only interpret as a profound, weary sadness. "That is the outcome we engineered, the outcome for which everything was sacrificed, but the cessation of hostilities does not mean the threat is gone. Tell me, Elder Xylos, what do your records say of our enemy? What do they call the foe we fought in the Great War?" Xylos hesitated. The Glypton archives were a mess of contradictions on this point. "The records are incomplete. They have no single name for your adversary. They are only referred to in fearful metaphor. The mind thirst, the reality eaters, the sound of falling stars. Most accounts focus on the actions of your own species, on the destruction you wrought." The custodian's reply was instantaneous, the sadness in its mental voice deepening into a chasm of grief. "They remember our methods, but not the reason. They remember the cure, but not the disease. It is perhaps the greatest tragedy of all. The destruction you speak of, it was not an act of conquest. It was an act of quarantine, a surgery performed on the fabric of spacetime itself." In the Nexus, a collective shockwave of disbelief rippled through the assembled minds. Vorlag's faceted form was rigid with stunned immobility. Quarantine? Surgery? The concepts were so alien to their understanding of the Great Silence. "Explain," Xylos projected, his scholarly curiosity now a burning fire. "Our foe was not a species. It was not an empire." The custodian's voice began to transmit images, concepts, and raw sensory data alongside its words, a cascade of information that flooded the minds of Xylos and the watching conclave. They saw swirling vortexes of non-color, heard the psychic screech of geometries that should not exist. It was a mimetic contagion. A pattern of thought that, once observed, began to rewrite the observer's mind. Once it infected a mind, it would then begin to rewrite the physical laws of the universe around that mind to better suit its own alien existence. It did not conquer planets. It consumed them, turning them into extensions of its own paradoxical, cancerous reality. It spread through communication, through art, through observation. The more a civilization learned of it, the faster it succumbed. It was a plague of consciousness itself. The conclave watched in horrified awe as the custodian's transmission showed them worlds not burned, but twisted. Planets where gravity flowed upwards, where life grew in crystalline loops of impossible logic, where stars shone with dark light. They saw species they had known only as fossils, vibrant and intelligent, suddenly collapse into screaming madness, their bodies and their technologies warping into monstrous parodies. "We were a young species when we first encountered it," the custodian continued, the voice now heavy with the burden of memory. "Brash, curious, expansive. We tried to fight it. We tried to understand it. We sent our fleets, our scientists, our philosophers, and we only fed it. Every ship we lost, every mind it broke, made it stronger. It learned from us. It began to anticipate our strategies. It turned our own logic against us." "So you changed your strategy," Xylos breathed, the terrible truth beginning to dawn on him. "We had no choice," the custodian confirmed. "We could not outfight it. We could not outthink it. We could only contain it. We had to create a firewall, a zone of silence where it could not spread. We calculated the trajectory of its expansion. We saw the civilizations that lay in its path. We sent warnings, but the warnings themselves were a vector for the contagion. To warn them was to condemn them." The mental image shifted. They saw vast human fleets not attacking alien worlds but moving with grim, surgical precision. They saw their weapons deployed, but they were not weapons of simple destruction. They were different. One device unleashed a wave that did not shatter planets, but aged their stars billions off-year in an instant, turning them into cold, dead husks before the contagion could take root. Another created a localized bubble of spacetime, so distorted that nothing, not even thought, could cross its boundary. They were silencing worlds. They were cutting off the limbs of the galaxy to save the body. Every world we sterilized, every sun we extinguished, was a world that would have been consumed by a fate far worse than death. The custodian's voice was a funeral dirge. We became the monsters to fight the true monstrosity. We were forced to become the very thing the galaxy would fear, to save it from a thing it could never understand. The Vigilance and its sister ships were the instruments of that terrible necessity. They are not warships. They are warden ships. Their purpose was to enforce the Great Quarantine, to hold the line. The final pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with the force of a physical blow. The human warship was not a weapon of conquest. It was a guardian, a lonely, terrible sentinel that had stood watch over a silent frontier for untold ages. The Great Silence was not an era of human madness, but an era of unimaginable human sacrifice. They had sacrificed their reputation, their honor, and countless lives, both their own and others, to protect a galaxy that would only remember them as villains. On his platform in the Nexus, High Strategist Vorlag lowered his head, a gesture of profound shame and reverence from a species that rarely displayed either. He had stood ready to destroy the very monument to the sacrifice that had allowed his own species, and every other in the conclave, to evolve and flourish in peace. The galaxy hadn't trembled because an ancient enemy had woken up. It had trembled because it was being confronted with the magnitude of a debt it never knew it owed. Xylos, his mind reeling, could only project a single, humbled thought to the custodian. Why? Why carry this burden? Why not let the galaxy fall and save yourselves? The custodian's response was the most profound and unsettling revelation of all. It was simple, devoid of arrogance, a plain statement of a fundamental truth of its creators. Because it was there, and we were the only ones who could. When the choice is between oblivion and a terrible duty, humanity has always chosen the duty. The voice paused, then added a final, chilling addendum. The asterisk Vigilance entered dormant mode upon the successful containment of the contagion within the quarantined zone. We have slept for ages, monitoring the boundary for any sign of a breach. Our awakening was not random. It was triggered by an automated system. A cold dread, far deeper and more real than their previous fear of humanity, began to creep into the minds of the conclave. Triggered? Xylos asked, his voice a whisper. What was the trigger? The long-range sensors detected a signal, the custodian replied, its calm, measured tone doing nothing to rob the words of their terrifying import. A signal with the unique, paradoxical signature of the contagion. It did not come from within the quarantine zone. It came from outside the galaxy. The silence that followed was absolute. The truth was a crushing weight. The war was not over. It had only been a single, desperate battle in a conflict that spanned galaxies and eons. The monster had not been defeated, only held at bay. And now it was stirring again in the unfathomable darkness of the intergalactic void. The ancient human warship had not woken up to threaten the galaxy. It had woken up to save it again. And this time it was not alone. It had woken to find a galaxy full of inheritors, a conclave of species who had lived their entire history in the peace it had bought for them with its own damnation. The duty was no longer humanity's alone. The implications of the custodian's revelation settled over the Nexus like a shroud. The Grand Chamber, once a stage for political posturing and philosophical debate, now felt like a fragile bubble of light in an encroaching, infinite darkness. The threat was not a historical footnote. It was a clear and present danger, on a scale they could barely comprehend. The mimetic contagion, the reality eater, was not merely contained in the graveyard of empires. It, or something akin to it, existed in the void between galaxies, and it was looking their way. High Strategist Vorlag was the first to break the stunned silence. He raised his head, and the light in the Nexus caught the facets of his crystalline face, revealing not arrogance but a newfound, terrible clarity. Custodian, he projected, his voice no longer the grinding boom of a warlord but the precise, focused tone of a strategist faced with an unwinnable war. You say your vessel is a warden ship. What are its capabilities? You sterilized worlds, you bent spacetime. These are not tools of conventional warfare. What can it do against a foe that is not a fleet but an idea? The unmanned human probe before Xylos' ship remained impassive, but the custodian's mental voice resonated with the cold pragmatism of its creators. The primary systems of the Vigilance are not weapons in the sense you understand them. They are reality anchors. The main cannon does not fire energy or matter. It projects a stabilized, baseline field of quantum reality. In its high-intensity form, it can overwrite and reset physical laws in a localized area, effectively sterilizing a region contaminated by the contagion. This is the power you saw in our records, the force that unmade suns. In its low-intensity, wide dispersion form, it reinforces the existing laws of physics, making it more difficult for the contagion to take root. It is a shield of logic against a sword of madness. The custodian continued, its explanation a torrent of concepts that stretched the boundaries of the conclave's understanding. The ship's hull is not merely dense matter. It is a matrix of compressed spacetime, making it nearly impervious to physical harm and reality-warping effects. Our engines do not travel through space. They reposition the ship within the fabric of the universe, a subtle but critical distinction that leaves no wake for the contagion to follow. But our most important asset is our archives. We carry the sum total of humanity's knowledge on the contagion, its patterns, its vectors, its evolutionary tendencies. We fought it for centuries. We learned its nature at an unspeakable cost. Elder Xylos, having processed the torrent of information, felt a profound sense of humility. His own people, the Glyptons, prided themselves on being the galaxy's foremost archivists, yet their most forbidden records were but a child's fearful scribbles compared to the library of terrible truths the Vigilance carried. You say you fought it. You imply you did not win but merely contained it. Is it truly undefeatable? In a direct confrontation of minds, perhaps, the custodian admitted, a flicker of something ancient and weary in its tone. Its nature is to consume and convert. But it has weaknesses. It requires a complex consciousness to serve as a gateway. It cannot manifest in simple, non-sentient matter or life. It is parasitic. It needs a host. And it is vulnerable during the initial stages of infection before it can fully rewrite the local reality. The strategy we developed was not to kill the parasite, which proved impossible, but to starve it, to deny it the fertile ground of advanced, interconnected civilizations. A chilling realization dawned on every member of the conclave. Their entire civilization, a vast, interconnected network of worlds, sharing information, art, and philosophy through the nexus, was the perfect petri dish for such a contagion. They were everything the ancient humans were not: open, communicative, and trusting. They were a banquet laid out for the reality eater. Vorlag stepped forward on his dais. Then our current way of life, the very existence of this conclave, is a systemic vulnerability. It is, the custodian affirmed without pity or judgment. Your unity is your strength, but it is also your greatest danger. One infected mind, one contaminated data stream reaching the nexus, and the entire conclave could fall before you even realized you were at war. The Luminar's aurora shimmered, its light shifting from a contemplative gold to a stark, alert white. Its collective voice, for the first time, held a trace of something akin to concern. The signal you detected, from beyond, can you analyze its nature? Is it a probe, a broadcast, an echo? It is faint at the very edge of our sensors' reach. The custodian replied, but its characteristics are unambiguous. It is not a natural phenomenon. It is structured, intelligent, and it is actively probing the quantum foam for receptive realities. It is searching. It may have been searching for eons, broadcasting into the void. Our awakening may have inadvertently caught its attention, or its arrival at the edge of our galaxy may simply be a coincidence of cosmic timing. The result is the same. It knows something is here. The finality of the statement crushed the last vestiges of the old order. The rivalries, the ancient grudges, the political maneuvering between the Cathar and the Glyptons, all of it seemed like the squabbling of children in the shadow of a tidal wave. They had spent centuries debating borders and trade routes, while the real threat, the one that had brought the mighty human empire to its knees, was waiting in the wings. High strategist Vorlag did something no Cathar had done in the history of the conclave. He turned to Elder Xylos, his posture not of a rival but of a subordinate seeking counsel. Elder, he said, the title now holding a genuine, unforced respect. The Glypton archives contain the history. The Cathar fleets are the sword, but we are fighting a war of ideas, not of hulls and shields. Your wisdom is needed now more than ever. How do we proceed? Xylos drifted slowly toward the center of the chamber, his ancient mind already sifting through the terrible new truths, searching for a path forward. We must learn. We must adapt. Our pride has been our shield for millennia, but it will be our undoing now. We must humble ourselves before the knowledge that this custodian offers us. We must learn the lessons written in humanity's sacrifice. He turned his gaze to the shimmering form of the Luminar. And we must change. The conclave can no longer be a forum for debate. It must become a unified command. Our species must integrate our knowledge, our technology, our strategies. The Cathar must learn to fight a foe that cannot be targeted with weapons. The Glyptons must learn to seal away knowledge that is too dangerous to know. And the Lumina, your unique perception, may be our greatest weapon. You may be able to sense the contagion's influence where our crude sensors cannot. The luminar's light pulsed in solemn agreement. "We are prepared. The purpose of the conclave has been redefined." The focus of the chamber returned to the hollow display, to the small, dark human probe hanging in space before the Glypton vessel. The custodian had been silent, a patient observer to the monumental shift in galactic politics its revelations had caused. Xylos projected his thoughts to it, his mental voice now imbued with the authority of a unified conclave. "Custodian. Humanity stood alone. We will not. We offer you an alliance. Your knowledge, your experience, combined with the resources and diversity of the conclave, the fleets of the Cathar, the archives of the Glypton, the perceptual abilities of the Lumina, and the united will of every species under our protection. We will not let your sacrifice be in vain. We will stand the next watch." For a long moment the custodian was silent. The conclave waited, the future of the galaxy hanging on the response of this ancient, sorrowful ghost. Then its mental voice returned, and for the first time there was a new emotion woven into its ancient weariness. It was not joy, not excitement, but a deep, resonant, and profound sense of relief. "For millennia we have been the vigilance asterisk. We have been the keepers of a terrible silence," the custodian said, "to have allies to share the burden. It is more than humanity dared to hope for. We accept. The archives of the vigilance are open to you. Our duty is now your duty. Our war is now your war." A new era had begun, not with a treaty signed in ink or light, but with a shared understanding of a common doom. The Cathar fleets did not stand down. They redeployed, forming a deep-range sensory net at the galactic rim. The Glypton archives were not opened, but selectively sealed, with new protocols in place to contain dangerous information. The very structure of galactic communication was being reevaluated, redesigned to be less open, more resilient, a network of firewalls against a psychic inferno. In a final act of this first historic communication, the custodian revealed one last thing. "The name of our ship is not merely a designation. It is a philosophy, vigilance asterisk. It is a state of perpetual awareness, of readiness. It is the price of survival against a foe that never sleeps. There is one more piece of our history you must understand to grasp the full nature of the task ahead." A final, complex data packet was transmitted from the human probe. It was not tactical data or historical records. It was a cultural artifact, a piece of human music rendered into a form the conclave's minds could perceive. It was a symphony of immense, heartbreaking sorrow. Yet underneath the grief there was a core of unyielding, defiant strength. It was the sound of a people choosing a terrible duty over extinction, a hymn to their own sacrifice. And as the last notes faded, a final image appeared in their minds, a single, clear star chart. It showed the Milky Way galaxy, and beside it a neighboring galaxy, Andromeda. And between them, in the black, empty void, was a single point of light, labeled with a single human word that the custodian translated with solemn gravity. "The signal we detected did not come from a random point in the void," the custodian explained as the conclave stared at the chilling map. "It originates from a fixed point, a structure, ancient, impossibly large, and not of our making. It is a listening post, we believe, a beacon, a lure." The label on that point, the human word for this source of their ancient, undying enemy, bloomed in their consciousness. It was a name that held no meaning in their own languages, but it carried a weight of primal dread, a sense of a thing that should not be. The label read, "Labyrinth." The galaxy no longer trembled. It had found its resolve. It looked out into the great, star-dusted dark, no longer ignorant of the true nature of the cosmos. It was not an empty space to be explored and conquered, but a silent ocean filled with sleeping leviathans. And one of them was beginning to stir. The children of the Milky Way, inheritors of a forgotten war, stood ready. The long watch of humanity was over. A new galactic vigil had just begun.